Good morning, everybody. My name is Dr. Vic McKinney, and I'm very pleased to be here to present, even if it's remotely. I think it's a great opportunity to kind of expand our knowledge and experiences on ICF education. A brief introduction to myself. I am a student, I'm a postdoctoral student at the University of Cape Town in South Africa. 31 years ago, I was in a road accident which left me paralyzed from the shoulders down. So I'm a C4 quadriplegic. And I was only just turned 19 at the time, and it took me kind of a number of years to get back into society, back into studying in the academy. And now I've worked myself up to being a researcher and lecturer at the Faculty of Health Sciences, predominantly there at the University of Cape Town. So what I wanted to share with you today was my presentation on how I educate my students using ICF and the factors involved with it. So I'm just going to quickly say goodbye to my face here and share the slideshow. Okay. So basically call it Understanding the ICF and using lived experiences of spinal cord injured wheelchair users in South Africa. I gave a brief description to my students of what it's about. I also explained that previously disability sort of only began where health ended. My personal experience was that when I went to hospital, this was in 1987, I was then given forms to go stay in a residential home and almost never be seen again in society. And that's kind of how people with disabilities were dealt with. They went to go live in residential homes somewhere that were never really seen. So you were almost like you were beyond healing. The message was that you did not fit in society. If you couldn't be healed, you didn't belong. And that was kind of how you were meant to feel. So it was great when the ICF was introduced. It incorporated disability within the health spectrum, which was a big advancement. Also recognizes the ICF as a versatile tool that can share. And the nice thing with using the ICF is that I shared with students of mine who are civil engineers, especially civil engineers and architecture. It's quite a technical subject. To have a nice tool that focuses on functioning without the other messy stuff of disability, if you like to call it, makes it easier for the students to relate to and use in their professional practice. So basically the key thing, of course, is that ICF recognizes that disability is a result of individual and impairment, okay? And I talk my students through that. Quickly, basically explain that if there's stairs in front of a building, it represents the old medical model of disability, and that puts barriers in my way. And of course, if there's a ramp at the entrance to a building, that means I can get into the building. And so in that sense, I'm not disabled. And so the more barrier-free access we have, the less disabled we become as people with impairments. And then I apply the structure, the ICF structure, to a spinal cord injury case and put the labels accordingly. Okay. And looking at the SI context, bring in all the external factors as is described in the ICF. So SCI, of course, is spinal cord injury. So begin with products and technology, highlight the information systems, enable people with disabilities these days to really access anything. I know for myself, if I'm at my computer, then I'm not disabled at all. There's nothing I cannot do. I incidentally got my first operating computer in 1993. I had a mouse that I could operate with my head, and I had a graphic design closed corporation. So that was a long time ago. And so it shows how long the assistive technology has been available, and the fact that it's getting better and better is a big plus. Asking simple questions. How do people with disabilities access information? Information is a key thing. I think it's important not to just think ICF relates to, or that barriers to participation just relates to the built environment and having a ramp in front of a building. So I emphasize this point. Of course, moving on to built environment, I use these two pictures particularly because they are well-known places in South Africa, in Cape Town, and they're international locations. And these places one is a big tourist attraction at the waterfront at Cape Town Harbour, and now there's the Kirstenbosch Botanical Gardens, which is an international site. So They're international locations with a high standard and level of tourism, and they shouldn't be inaccessible in any way. Okay. And of course, showing examples from the UK and the USA, examples of wheelchair swings, and how we want to try to get these. We think we have one of these in the country. I think it's Johannesburg, and we want to try and incorporate more. And what a wonderful message it sends to show real inclusion of children in playgrounds. Extending to support and relationships. So this shows a friend of mine, Randall. And I talk about how I met Randall about 6 years ago. And when I met him, he had no computer or any kind of system of communication he could communicate with. So in 2013, we networked and managed to organize a laptop with the same assistive devices that I'm using at the moment to operate his computer. And so for the first time, Randall had an email address. And when you can stop to consider how much you use an email in your life, and I asked my students to reflect upon, imagine not having email until 4, 5, 6 years ago. How would that have affected your participation in everyday life as a student, etc., and with friends, etc.? Okay, attitudes of society, one of the biggest barriers to overcome. Okay, particularly in terms of from general society to professions to the academy, where people with disabilities are not consulted in the decision-making process. So we have no say about our own environment, and of course that means we are constantly excluded from the process. Okay. And this increases and perpetuates negative perceptions. Okay. Services and policies. We have many challenges to services and policies in South Africa. So it's about, are you able to access the healthcare services? Examples are challenges with accessing the primary healthcare facilities. If I think of my friend Randall, he lives in a township, and it's far for him to get to the what we call a local day or clinic hospital. And so if it's raining, he cannot go, even if he has an appointment. It'll take about an hour and a half to drive there in his wheelchair. And of course, he cannot go if it's raining. Also, in other townships, if it's been raining, the sand turns to mud, and people in wheelchair users in particularly find it very difficult to get around in the local terrain. And then also getting monthly medical supplies. Often they're very short, usually short of their quota, which is a constant strain. And then especially in terms of health systems and social policies, most of in South Africa, people with a disability will claim for a disability grant if they're not working. And so the disability grant is about 1,700 Rand a month, which is about roughly around about 220 euros per month. And what we've created in South Africa is a dependency model. People become dependent on their disability grants for survival. And so it's hard for them to give that up, even if they were to try and find employment where they can. Okay. Personal factors. Besides just all the other factors of natural environment, accessing healthcare and education, employment, can be a personal factor of how it's affected you. I know that after I was paralyzed at the age of 19, it took me many years after I came out of hospital and came home, many years to get used to my own body not being able to move from being a very active student. And also, I realized when I came home from hospital that I had two disabilities. The one disability was my paralysis, and the other was how people treated me. And it was harder to come almost to both of them at the same time. Friends I'd seen for many years, people I knew for a long time, didn't know how to relate to me anymore. And it was difficult to go out in public. Places weren't accessible. And I went home and stayed with my mom. I was an only child, and unfortunately, my father was killed in my same accident. So my mom and I were at home for most of the time. I became totally excluded from society in general. And kind of day by day would go by, and this it can affect you quite deeply when you become so excluded and isolated. And it's quite a depressing kind of thing. So we fought hard to get friends around to come around to the house and get involved with kind of organizations where we could, and just try to participate more and be part of society. But also for kids who become disabled and who've gone to special schools, we find overall that the special school system for children with disabilities, they receive an inferior education. They don't develop the same life skills and maturity skills needed to enter employment and education. So it's often difficult in that sense. And also people who are from very rural or from very poverty-stricken areas like townships, etc., even around the major cities of South Africa, are cut off and become inferior and feel inferior on their neighborhoods to what they've experienced in being disabled. So it makes it very challenging for them to integrate into society. They often feel lack confidence and feel insecure about trying to claim back their rights. So I summarize my students to say, just to highlight that functioning goes beyond just being able to sit in a wheelchair. It refers to the external factors of products and technology and the other factors as well. And that all of these have an impact on the health and well-being of people with disabilities. Okay. And then I move on to Vic and Randall's experiences. So Randall is a friend of mine who is similar to me. He has a C4. I'm paralyzed from the shoulders down. I'm a C4 level quadriplegic, and Randall is the same. I had my accident when I was 19. Randall had his accident when he was 9 years old. He fell off a gate at school and landed on the back of his neck. Okay, so this is Randall. He lives in his home in Mitchell's Plain. Mitchell's Plain is a big township in South Africa that is near Cape Town. So it's generally a small place. The other problems is that coming with a poverty area is that it comes with its own set of socioeconomic challenges. So there's a big problem with gangsterism in local townships and Cape Flats areas, which is where Mitchell's Plain is. Drugs and violence are quite the order of the day. Randall himself has lost 2 brothers to gangsterism, one of which was shot outside of his house. So that's not an unusual story, unfortunately. But to get back to his working environment, so this is Randall's house. He's lived here most of his life. His bedroom is a small house, and there's his mom in the kitchen. As opposed to my lifestyle, I grew up under South Africa in the apartheid era, and although I wasn't wealthy, I had a very privileged upbringing. I had a great education. I've managed to develop funds for myself, so I have my own accessible transport. I have my own personal assistant to get me in and out of bed, wash and dress me, get me in my wheelchair. I've traveled around. There's a World Cup in 2010 South Africa, going to stadiums. That was the final in Johannesburg. So I'm able to access the buildings that are now accessible, etc. So one of the things I did during the World Cup was pick up friends of mine who lived in the townships, because they had this wonderful soccer event that everybody wanted to go to in their own town. But for them to get to the stadium in Cape Town was very difficult because of lack of accessible transport. So that's another key barrier that we experience in South Africa. So we'd pick up, go to a game, I'd pick up about 4 or 5 guys and have a combi full of wheelchairs and crutches, etc. And off we go to the game. To computers, as I mentioned before, technology is a gateway to freedom in so many ways. So Vic and Randall, as we have here, both Randall and myself, both have assistive devices now on the laptops to operate with our heads. That's a shot taken of Randall in my bedroom. We both paint with our mouths. My easel, I built in the mid-90s with an engineering student. We developed it. So it's another challenge is about making your own accessible, or creating your own accessible platforms, I guess. So I can't just go to a shop and buy an easel. And this is what happened. Randall was donated an easel when somebody heard that he was painting, but he couldn't use it because it wasn't accessible for his wheelchair. So we've developed a kind of a small easel that can fit on a table, and he moves his wheelchair under the table. My easel on the left is an easel that comes right over my wheelchair, and I kind of drive into it, and in a similar way. So my legs can go under the easel, and it's a height adjustable. This is a nice story. Randall began wheelchair dancing in 2013. Soon after I met him, we linked up with an amazing lady who's in the wheelchair there. That's his dancing partner. It's a lady called Kaylee Mycroft, who's become a UN ambassador. Kaylee was born with cerebral palsy and is a real inspiration. We know her quite well in South Africa, and even internationally, she's become well known. Kaylee's studied doing a master's in public law at University of Cape Town. So after I linked up with Randall in 2013, I went to an event to meet Kaylee's mom. She said, "You must come along to our wheelchair ballroom dancing." Randall was really, is that possible? Had no idea. And he loved to dance as a kid. He talks about how he used to dream of dancing again when he was, when he was paralyzed, and thought his dream would never come true. And of course, it did again when he started dancing again with Kaylee. So he's since won about 30 to 40 trophies. It's quite ridiculous how many he's won. So it's really nice, a nice story, and shows just what can be done as soon as you get an opportunity to participate. So having opportunities. So there's me, that's my wife Emma, getting married in 2009. I qualified at the top there with my doctorate in 2016. And of course, Emma and I have 2 kids. We have Jamie, who's 7, and Benjamin, who's 4. So at some point in my presentation with my students, before I show these slides of being family, I stop and I say, look guys, we're all social beings, and what are the first questions that we ask each other when we meet new people at an event, at a party, or at some kind of event? What do you want to know about each other? And I open the questions to the floor, and people say, what's your name? And they carry on. What do you do? I say, what do you do? That's one. Carry on to the question. Are you in a relationship? So are you married? Are you single? And those 2 questions are key, and they come up very quickly. And that's to do with our value, I think, and identity in society. So when we meet new people, we say, what do you do? And are you in a relationship? You know, are you married? Are you involved, etc. Okay. And then I say to my students, what do you think people ask me? And they say, where you come from? Say, carry on. What happened? And very quickly, somebody will say, what happened? So it doesn't take long before these key questions come up. For most people, what do you do? Are you in a relationship? And for me in a wheelchair, what happened? And I explain that's what's difficult. And that's what's a tough situation, because people see me and want to know what happened and don't look beyond that. The people do not generally expect me to do anything, or to be able to do anything, or to be in a relationship because I'm in a wheelchair. And that's what we need to come over. But in that sense, I have the opportunities because of my situation and my accessibility in my own sense, that I can get to university and study, that I can go out and meet people. In fact, I met my wife at university, that I can participate and be involved. A guy like Randall he's denied these opportunities through no fault of his own, because he lives in an inaccessible environment and because of his poverty. Okay, so it's about creating access to these opportunities as a human right. So this is Randall's environment. This is the area of Tafelsig right outside his house. There's a big park. Sometimes I phone Randall and I say, how's it going, Randall? He says, can you come through? He says, Vic, I'm not going out today because the gangsters are shooting. This is a very real thing. He wanted to stay inside his house for a whole week before getting out. So it's a reality, and it's indicative of some of the socioeconomic situation. Okay. Sandy Park. Also, about 20 minutes away walking is Strandfontein Beach, which is a local beach not far from Randall's home. Randall loves to go to the beach, and his friends often go, but unfortunately he can't go because along the way there's a railway line in the middle with a train station, and the train station doesn't have an accessible subway or bridge that he can cross over. So when his friends go to the beach, he has to stay at home. Whereas I like to go to a place called Lagoon Beach. It's one of my favorite areas. It's for me to go. And the reason is that there's a ramp down to the sand on the beach itself. So I'll go at low tide when the sand is still wet and hard. And I've got about 30 to 40 yards where I can just go along the beach in my wheelchair. And I actually used to surf here when I go surfing here when I was a kid. So it's wonderful for me to chase my kids up and down and have them chase me along the beach. So it's my capacity to go out and participate. And more than that, just my ability to access has created my identity in society as a father and a husband. And I think that's challenging to many people, especially from the medical profession and others, to see that a guy in a wheelchair can be a father and a husband, but that's having access to opportunities. Okay. So we have a very similar impairment, but Randall and I represent the have and the have-nots of people living with disability in South Africa. So Randall's poverty reduces his ability to participate in the community and access good health services, education, employment. And he's very willing. Not only that, but given the chance, Randall is a key aspect, a key agent of change in his own community. He's constantly trying to speak at schools and doing art classes for kids in the local libraries where he paints with his mouse. And he teaches them to paint with their mouths by way of breaking down barriers and misconceptions about people with disabilities, showing what they can do. So it's a fantastic tool to use. And where I can, I bring Randall to my lectures. So this is Randall and I lecturing for the social infrastructure course It's an elective for third-year civil engineering students, but it's open to everybody, and it's a fantastic course. And it's I've brought Randall to it on the last 3 or 4 years, and really I take a back seat as much as I can. I realize I'm getting on in years. I'm not grey head, and I want succession. I want people like Randall who experience the real hardships in the community. I need that voice to come through and speak. I'm aware of my privileged and fortunate position. So it's developing that voice to speak and relate to the students. And it's really appreciated, because the fact, just myself speaking as someone with a disability from lived experience, what I've gone through, especially over the 30 years from having no access to the outside to now being able to access things like World Cup stadiums and be able to relate it to policy like the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, to show that correlation between policy and accessibility and how it's affected me in a personal capacity, to then to show how it affects Randall and so I represent the possibilities of what we can achieve, and Randall still represents the challenges of what can be achieved and how much further we need to go. So as students, using the ICF factors in this way enables me to highlight different, my abilities and capabilities and what my enablers and barriers to my facilitation, as well as Randall. And the students get it straight away. It enables them to identify barriers, and then they can use the ICF as a tool in their professional capacity to look at functioning. But of course, with that, I emphasize the crucial point of the disability movement slogan, which is nothing about us without us. And it is crucial to involve people with disabilities along the way and collaborate in working towards implementation strategies and policies, and also with students. I see higher education or tertiary education as a key area where we can make major change. It's not happening enough for me at the moment. In South Africa, we're constantly producing professionals from legal education, medical, business especially, economists. People are graduating from universities not knowing anything about disability or very little, and how to accommodate people with disabilities in education, the legal practice, how to in business and the economy. Okay, and we need to change that slowly but surely. That's most of my presentation. Thank you very much. The floor will be open for questions and answers. Thanks very much.